Welcome back to Change Ed.
Changed.
Your 15-minute podcast, weekly podcast with all things change and education. I am your host, Andrew Kuhn from Montgomery County Intermediate Unit, and here with me always,
Tony Marabito, Carbon Lehigh Intermediate Unit, Staff Development Facilitator.
Wow, that is still a super impressive title that you have there.
Appreciate that.
Here with us today, also super thrilled to bring on this new fixture is
Patrice Summercheck, also out of the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit.
Patrice. We are thrilled to have you here, and we know that you have so much information and knowledge to share with all four of our, we're past four. What do we have? Like 9, 12, 15?
At least 15 of my family members.
15 family members. Hello, Marabito family. Thank you for talking about us over Thanksgiving supper, and we appreciate all of you joining our podcast. We have been talking about a lot of different things so far in this podcast, and we are going to continue on our conversation focused on our new steel standards, but we're going to continue it by talking about three-dimensional learning. And I guess, as we kick off this three-dimensional learning, I have a lot of questions and a lot of things that I'm curious about when it comes to that. And I think what's so fascinating about it is, in a lot of ways, it's about giving teachers tools back, tools that they can use to educate students. And when you think about three-dimensional learning, kind of in a 10,000-foot view, it's really about three different kind of pillars or buckets that you can use as an educator. There is knowing information, where you have this body of knowledge that continues to grow, but you're able to go to it and grab it, you retain it, you use it. There's thinking. So when you have that information, what are you doing with that information? Are you able to think through, problem solve, process through things that come up? And then there's doing, actually getting hands-on. And now that you have information, you've thought about it, what are you able to actually do and make come to life, come to fruition with that? So my first question for both of you is, if you can only keep one of those, you cannot keep all three as an educator, you could only keep one, which of these one items would you pick? We're going to go with our highly esteemed colleague, Patrice, and have you kick it off for us.
I think I'm torn a little bit between the thinking and doing. I think there's a lot of thinking that has to happen in science, but I also know there's a lot of power in the doing aspect of things. So I think I would lean more towards the doing.
So active learning, right? Like actually physically being involved in doing things.
Demonstrating what I think kids, I'm talking about kids, demonstrating what I think kids know through the doing. I think there's an application there that isn't there with just knowing and just thinking. It's invisible.
All right, Tony, same question, new contestant.
Yeah, I agree with Patrice. I would go with doing. Even I think it lends itself to our society today. Students learn by watching YouTube videos, right? So I need to change the oil in my lawnmower. So I'm going to watch a video and then do it. So until I physically do something, it doesn't really take place in my mind. So maybe it varies by learner. For me, I'm a doer. I think the doing is the most important. I think that's when kids get their hands dirty, as Patrice said. And that's where the majority of the learning takes place. Not the other ones aren't bad, but I'm a doer.
So I heard you both talking about, kind of a teacher lens and talking about students, but how about, what was your experience like for both of you? Tony, I know there were still, horse and buggy. So, your historical reference would be really valuable in this conversation, but what was the learning style like? Let's use those three. Was there one in particular? Did you see a blend? Is it multiple? What was that experience for you?
After my dad showed me how to change horseshoes and I went to the classroom, I think there was just a lot of more of talking and preaching from the teacher as opposed to hands-on. And then I think all of the kids in my classes, before electricity on this planet, we couldn't wait for those days where there was an experiment laid out so we could actually see something in action and put our hands to something rather than just filling out a worksheet or a textbook. Not that my teachers were bad. They were all great teachers. They were wonderful. But we just loved those days that we knew, oh, there's a science experiment today.
Yeah, we need our teachers to be listeners. Don't be too mean to them.
Yeah.
But what I'm hearing you say is that of those three tools, that it was focused a lot in knowing.
Yeah.
And then every now and then it would be sprinkled in a doing, but maybe almost like a reward, right? Like at the end, there's kind of a carrot to dangle you along, and then you got to do that.
Exactly.
Right. And Patrice, how about you?
A lot of the same. The classes I was in had a lot of the knowing involved with it. And I think that we did do experiments as well, but they were more like a recipe. It wasn't really anything that allowed any of us to do any of this experimenting on our own or thinking or outside of the box, anything. It was definitely step by step, follow what you were doing. And then affectionately, in my physics class when I was in high school, we had, we would call the back of the book Bob, because we always did the odd problems. So we could check our answers in the back. And so we would always reference Bob, and we were never required to show our work. So I learned no physics because we had Bob.
I like that you mentioned recipe, because every experiment that I'm thinking it was kind of guided.
Yeah.
The teacher showed me a model of this, and then we kind of recreated that.
Yeah.
So we all had similar items at the end. It was a lot less discovery and more of, here's your recipe to complete this.
And there was nothing big to tie it to. It was always like a minor concept that we were studying, and we would look at it in depth after hearing the lecture, and we would follow this recipe. And then I guess the hope was that it would transfer to the assessment, which I don't think it did very often.
You know, listening to you talk, I actually think that context matters. And what I mean from that is knowing where did you both go to school? Are you from the area? Where are you from? Because I think that matters in the conversation.
Lehigh Valley, Bath, Pennsylvania.
Okay. So Pennsylvania boy.
Yeah.
Great.
Oviedo, Florida.
Oviedo, Florida. So
Just outside of it.
what's interesting is that you were explaining similar experiences, right? So maybe the style and approach to teaching, be it that was probably a best practice at that time, a little farther away for Tony, but Trace, right, more recent. So those are best practices, but they were across the board, right? So it's not, I guess the point is it wasn't just limited to Pennsylvania or to Oviedo.
You can say Orlando.
Okay, Orlando. Yeah, that makes sense. So here's the takeaway for me, just in this conversation with each of you, is that neither one of you said knowing, right? And there was some thinking dabbled in there, but it was really about doing.
Mm-hmm.
The interesting thing, specifically here in Pennsylvania, and this is painting with a really broad brush, but for our last science standards, we're running out of time, right? There's a lot of pressure. There was assessments kind of new to the field. And what did that look like? How do we work all these things? So we got to cut some things out. So we don't really have time for thinking, right? We're going to wipe out thinking because there's just not a lot of time there. And we need our students to just get a lot of information. So let's get rid of that. They can do that on their own time, right? Let's, when they're home, they're sitting around the table and they're having conversations. Kids love to talk so much about their day and what happened during their day. Like that's where they'll think and they can process. And doing, we just don't have time, right? We don't have time for that. And if we do, it's got to be a recipe. We got to get the kids to where they need to be really fast. We don't have the time for them to be learning it as they're doing it. So it's like, no, sorry, that's not the right answer. Well, what do you mean? I got the answer, but yeah, that's not right. Right. That wasn't what we were going for. So we were left with knowing, right? And we need to know this information so that later in life, you could do the thinking, you could do the doing, because we gave you all of this knowledge. One of the flaws with that is that the body of knowledge is increasing every single day. As we see new things that are being introduced, AI, for example, right now it's like it's adding gasoline to a fire, right? Like it's a blazing fire and things are going more and more rapidly. So we're seeing even significant shifts there. So that the thing that Steele's offers is that it's bringing it all together in an integrated fashion, but it's not even just hands-on, right? Because you would say the doing would be hands-on. It's actually minds-on, right? Like let's put our entire mind into this scenario and situation. And instead of going a mile wide and an inch deep, let's go a mile deep and only an inch wide, because if we're providing you with a skill set, instead of expecting students to just do this work on their own, we're giving them time in the classroom to do this work. So we don't need to go and have all of this information that we've taken away and that we've attained. Instead, if you can apply it here, then we're going to provide you with the skills that you can go and apply it somewhere else. So you don't necessarily have to have me there as your guide. the experiences that we've created and developed together can help you reproduce that, or come to a conclusion without me being there. So what do you think, in your experience, might be some hurdles for our educators as we talk about three-dimensional learning as compared to what could arguably be said that what used to be one-dimensional learning?
I think you touched upon a little bit time, or at least thinking that these experiments or these hands-on activities are going to take too much time. And then also the constraints of testing, because we're not even sure what's going to be on the new PSSA, Keystones, things like that. I think those are the two barriers. Mostly, I think when I speak to teachers, it's time.
I think additionally, the concern for teaching in a different way that you've been taught versus what's comfortable. And not that I'm saying that, what's comfortable was already there, but I'm thinking that it's uncomfortable in working in the unknown. And so I think that at least for me, when I was teaching, I have an elementary background. If I didn't know the content, I didn't feel comfortable allowing my students any freedom. Because if I knew what I was teaching and I knew what I could answer and I knew all that stuff, because I felt like I needed to be the imparter of knowledge based off of the standards and the way that I was teaching, or the way that I was taught as well. And I think that that's a potential barrier as well. The lack of pre-service information I would get as a teacher to be able to feel comfortable enough to teach content in a way that allows for open-ended responses.
Right. And that's an important piece, that just because we haven't experienced ourselves as educators doesn't mean that it's bad or it's wrong or it won't work. It just means that we need to be willing to be a lead learner in that space, right?
And require a little bit of comfort in the unknown. That was a struggle for me as an elementary teacher.
Right. So embracing the power of learning and being willing to try and to fail as well. Any final words or thoughts? You don't know what you want to say, Tony? Nothing?
I'm a doer.
Oh, you're a doer. Okay. Patrice, anything that you'd like to add for the good of the cause?
Nope, I think you said it all.
Well, I'd like to say, Patrice, for your first interview to replace Tony, you've done a fabulous job. We really appreciate having you. I think if we get to 15 views of this episode, it's a done deal. Tony, thank you for being on the show.
It's nice having you.
We are family still.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, then viewership will drop. But we are going to be focusing on three-dimensional learning for the month of December. We look forward to having you join us on this journey as we all learn together. Till next time.